Yeah. Hello, good afternoon everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Modesty's Property Corner, Season 1, Episode number 26. And today we are going to be talking about diversifying your property portfolio part 2. That suggests to you that we've dealt with the part 1 of diversifying your property portfolio. If you go back and watch our episode last week, you see where we started from when we started talking about this very important investment strategy and principle called diversification. And this particular investment principle cuts across every kind of investment you think of. Without diversification, there will be a lot of risks that you are taking and that you are shouldering that you shouldn't be taking as an investor. So as a property investor or as an aspiring property investor, it's important you understand the dynamics of diversification, the variations of diversification, the different options available for you when you want to diversify your property, and the different ways you could possibly diversify your property. Most importantly, your property investment, not really your property. Most importantly, understand why you are diversifying your property investment. And the central reason behind diversification is minimization of risk or possible elimination of risk. And as I said last week, risk is an inherent part of investment. Every investment carries an element of risk. So you cannot really separate investment from risk. And because every investment carries elements of risk, the smartest investors are those who identify the risks that are inherent to their investment proposal and then formulate a strategy, a way of either mitigating against that risk, minimizing it, or completely eliminating it. And the lower the risk, the more you reduce the risks in your investment, the higher the potential returns you get from that investment. So that's why diversification plays a huge role, because what diversification does is that it removes the bulk of that risk from one central location of your investment or from one central aspect of your assets and spreads that risk across all assets that make up that portfolio. And if all assets bear different varying levels of risk or equal levels of risk, and that risk is spread as wide as thin as possible, it makes that risk less potent against your investments. That's what we are trying to do. So when we bring that concept into property investment, what we are trying to say here is, if you diversify your property portfolio well enough, the risks will not be concentrated on one property or one location or one property strategy that you have adopted. You have spread that risk across by adopting different strategies for diversification. So I listed 10 diversification strategies that we're going to be talking about. Last week we dealt with 5 of them, and today we're going to be finalizing the last 5 of it. So let me start by apologizing for not being here on Wednesday, which is the normal day that we normally have our property education program, but we are here anyway. So a couple of things took place, and I decided to move it to Friday. So rather than not coming to you at all, I chose to come to you later than planned. So I hope you pardon me for not being here on Wednesday, but hey, for those who would have been here on Wednesday and they were not able to attend and they are not here today, this video is going on YouTube as well. So we're going to make the YouTube version available to everyone so that at your own convenience you can always watch whatever channel, whatever medium you prefer to consume your content. So without much ado, let's dive straight into today's topic. So we've dealt with the first five strategies of diversification. Number 6 on the diversification strategy that I want to talk about today is diversification along the lines of objectives. You see, as an investor, before you go into any investments, you need to set out clearly what your objectives are for that investment you want to embark on. More especially property. your objectives for going into property investment has to be really clear. Why am I getting into property? What's the point of getting into property? Now, there are two clear objectives that people, decide on when they want to go into property. I said two clear doesn't mean those are the only two, right? But there are two clear, distinct ones that's always very prevalent in why people go into property investments. Number one of them is some people go into property investments for growth, for capital growth, which means they want to build wealth. So I'm going to property investment for income purposes, which means they want to use the income from property to augment their own income. And some people, by the time they use it to augment their property, their own main income, somehow they keep on building their property portfolios, and the income from the property portfolio now outstrips their own main income. And that's where you see people quitting their main jobs to focus on property business. It didn't start overnight. They had those main jobs and then they went into property. And gradually they were building property portfolios, they were building other property investments, and the income was coming in from there. And then at a point, the income from the property investments now became bigger and higher than what they were earning in their everyday job. And they said, okay, you know what? I'm going to focus on this property investment and I'm going to quit my job, because this one gives me more freedom to do what I want to do when I want to do it, and I'm in charge of my own destiny, and I'm running my own property business. They go into that and they decide to do it. It doesn't necessarily mean that it works for everybody. There are still some people who are still in their main jobs. They have property income coming in, which is more than what they're earning on their main jobs. But because they haven't got that much time, skill, and expertise to run a property business, they still say to themselves, I'm not going to get involved in this property business. I'm going to allow somebody else to run it for me. And they just hand it over to estate agents and they run it for them. So, but diversification along the lines of objective is one of the strategies of diversification. So some people diversify along the lines of objectives by buying some properties for the purpose of growth and buying some properties for the purpose of income. The properties they have bought for the purpose of growth, they will target areas that have accelerated capital growth in terms of properties, where property prices appreciate quicker, where capital appreciation is quicker. In certain areas of the UK, property prices appreciate quicker than some other areas. For example, it's generally believed that down south, the southern part of England, properties appreciate quicker in terms of capital appreciation. They appreciate quicker in the southern part of England than they do up north. But there are certain areas up north that also experiences accelerated capital growth in properties. So it's all down to how much research you have put into the area that you want to invest and the area that you want to buy into. If you're putting enough time to investigate, to research, and to check out the areas you want to invest, you will see already existing data about how properties have been appreciating in those areas. But again, it starts from you clearly identifying what your investment objectives are. If your objective is to build wealth or to focus on capital growth, then that becomes the line of your diversification. You will just focus on building wealth and building property portfolio that gives you that objective of capital appreciation. But if you want to diversify it a bit, you might decide to invest in certain areas where wealth is built quicker in the capital appreciation, and other areas where income is the main objective. For example, there are certain areas up north where the yield on the properties are higher than the yield in properties down south. So the property prices might be cheaper, the mortgages might be cheaper, the property price appreciation might take longer, but the yield on those properties are higher than those properties that are maybe down south. So you then make a choice of what your priority is. Do I want income or do I want capital growth? If I want capital growth, I know where to go. If I want income, I know how to assess the yield and the income potentials of a particular property. If this property gives me more yield and I want to use the income from there to maybe augment my own income or my main income, or I need that income from that property for retirement, right? It might be your retirement plan. You buy that property and you want it for retirement plan because the income from there will help augment your pension income. So it's all down to what your objectives are. And if you clearly define those objectives, you can diversify your property along the lines of those objectives. People buy properties that appreciate in value quicker sometimes because they just want to build. They don't really need the income. So all they want to do is build wealth because they don't need the income. If you don't need the income, then there is no point, going to invest in properties that gives you that income, because that income that you're getting from that property is actually taxable. So you might be thinking of the impact of that income from the property on your tax status. The income from that property might actually take you above a certain tax threshold, and you might end up paying more tax than you should be paying. I'm not a tax advisor, so I'm not here to advise you on whether to invest for income purposes, because of tax reasons. If you need tax advice, you go meet a tax advisor and they will tell you what the tax implication of income from your property will be on your tax status. But that's a possibility. That's something that happens because the income that comes in from there, depending on where your tax status is and depending on where your income is, if you add that income from property to your already existing income, there could be tax implications on that. Some people might say, I don't want that. I just want to maintain this tax status. The income from these properties, I don't need them. So I'd rather go and invest in places where there will be capital appreciation. I'm not going to be taking out the income. The income will just be there, and I'll be building up this wealth in this property until a certain time when I will need to take that wealth out of that property. So that's number 6 of the diversification strategy. Number 7 of the diversification strategy we want to discuss today is diversifying along the lines of ownership, how these properties are owned. Now, you can own a property in your individual name. You can own a property in a limited company, SPV. You can own a property in a joint venture. You can own a property as an angel investor. You could invest in somebody else's property proposal or investment proposal. There are different ways of owning a property investment or being involved in a property investment. So people might also decide to diversify their property portfolio along the lines of ownership, the way they own these properties. There are certain people who, if you look at their property portfolios, for some of my clients whom I've been sorting their mortgages out. If you look at their property portfolio, some of them are owned in their individual names. Some of them are owned in limited company SPVs. Yeah. Then aside that, they could also get involved in joint ventures as well. And there are benefits and there are risks that joint ventures take care of as well. They might also decide to be angel investors, where maybe somebody who lives in an area where they don't cover. Say the person is based down south here, and somebody who is based in Liverpool comes with a property investment proposal and say, look, if you invest in this property proposal, I'm going to give you 30%. We're going to split this profit 70-30. You take 30, I'll take 70%. Or you could invest in this property proposal and I'm going to give you a guaranteed interest on your investment of say 10% per annum. And that might appeal to them. And they'll say, well, I've got this idle cash lying around. I could invest in there. I'm not putting anything else except my money. My time is not involved. And this guy is an experienced investor. He's an experienced property person. I trust him. I'll give him these funds. He will invest, and I'll make a cool 10% on my funds, which is more than what I would get in any other investment proposal or in shares or stocks or savings. They must have analyzed different returns available to them on that money and decided why they would want to go with that person. That's them being an investor, an angel investor in a property. So that's one side of the business that they are running with a particular part of their investment capital. So they might have a pool of funds available to them to invest in properties. Then they will split that pool of funds into different formats of property investment ownership. They might say, okay, 25% of this pool of funds are used to buy a property in my sole name because there is a benefit there for them. And then they will they use a proportion of that investment capital to buy properties in a limited company name, maybe for inheritance tax benefits, or maybe for transfer of wealth, for ease of transfer of wealth, or maybe for just tax benefits that comes with property investment via a limited company. That could be their reason. And then they might also go into joint ventures, where they split the risk of that investment between them and their joint venture partners, and they don't have to undertake that risk all by themselves, and they might be leveraging on somebody else's experience and expertise by joint venturing, and that might be the risk they are mitigating. So you can see the different variations of risks that are involved in these ownership structures that they are embarking on. And to spread that risk as thin as possible, they get involved in different ways of owning a property. So you might see portfolios that have these different dynamics to the investments because of the different risks that are posed by those different ownership structures. Number 8 is diversifying along the lines of finance. Diversifying along the lines of finance basically deals with how the property investment is financed. Some people diversify their property investment portfolio along the lines of how they finance their property investments. So the different ways you can finance a property investment, you can finance it through a mortgage, right? But there are certain property investments that are mortgage free. They bought them in cash. There are certain property investments that were bought on interest-only mortgages. Some were bought on repayment mortgages. These are different financial options available to you in owning a property. So there could be a property investment diversification along the lines of finance. Some people have property portfolios where they bought some of the properties cash outrightly because maybe it was cheap enough for them to just pay cash and then own that property mortgage free, because they didn't want the risk associated with owing mortgage on that property. They wanted to get rid of that risk because that property to them will give them more yield if they owned it mortgage free, and they felt they could afford it, and the risk of the funds losing value every day, put it in that property because they felt the funds will be appreciating more as a property asset than as a cash asset, right? Some people took on a mortgage to buy a property because they wanted to leverage on other people's money that the banks will lend them, and that will help them free up some more cash for more property investments, which will help them expand their portfolio. Because when you leverage on such debts, it gives you more capacity. So if you have £100,000, for example, which you have a choice of either going to buy one property of £100,000 and own that one property, or you could buy 4 different properties of £25,000 deposit each, and each of them costing you £100,000. So that gives you capacity for 4 different properties and putting down £25,000 as deposit, for example, if you're going for a 75% loan to value mortgage. So that's an option for them. So some people might decide to mix it up a bit. Okay, I'm going to buy some property in cash and leave them mortgage free, maybe because they would like to either live in that property one day, or they would like to gift it to somebody one day, or they have a future plan for that property which they do not want any debt on that. And then they will go on and buy another property or other properties using debt, right? Like mortgages. And then even within mortgages, there are interest-free mortgages and there are repayment mortgages. Some people buy some properties on interest-free mortgages, interest only, on interest only mortgages, yeah, because they would like to maximize the returns, the yield on that property, and they see no reason on repaying the mortgage debts. They don't mind selling the property if the worst comes to worst at the end of the 25-year period and paying the lender back. Some would choose to have some of their properties on repayment mortgages because they would like to own that asset at the end of the mortgage term, because they have other plans for that particular property and that asset, or they may have some kind of emotional attachment for that asset. For example, it might be a property they have lived in before and they remortgaged that property as a leg to buy a new property. They might have been emotionally attached to that same property, and they were thinking, oh, I can't afford to lose this property. I would still like to have this property as my property at the end of the mortgage term. So they might put that particular property, that their first leg to buy property, on a repayment mortgage, which means at the end of the mortgage term, they will still be owning that property. And then they will now put the rest on interest-only mortgage. So there are a variety of reasons that could, inform people's decision to finance their property investments in different formats, and that could form part of their diversification strategy to mitigate against certain risks. Number 9 on the diversification strategy is to diversify it along the lines of property use. Okay. Some properties are categorized as commercial properties, some are categorized as semi-commercial, and some are residential properties. So again, from some of my clients that I've seen their property portfolios, some of them have a mixture of commercial properties, semi-commercial properties, and residential properties. And these different categories of properties, classified according to their uses, basically bear different levels of risks, and those different levels of risk are taken care of by diversification. So there are certain times in the economic life cycle where commercial properties become a hot cake. People are going into businesses, and businesses are buzzing. Commercial properties like shops, warehouses, and properties that are used for commercial purposes and offices are really a big deal. You can go to a particular location, and in that location, the hottest properties there that gives you most returns on your investment with commercial properties. So you could go there and buy, some commercial properties and take advantage of the hustling and bustling and the busyness of that area and the commercial viability of that area, because you've got a commercial property there. And then you might go somewhere else and buy residential properties, because say in that area, there's a hospital, there are facilities, there are amenities, the income ratio there is quite impressive, so people can afford to rent in that area. I buy residential properties in that area, so that when there is an economic boom and commercial properties are really doing well, that commercial property will be doing well. And when there is a bit of a blip in the economy and people are struggling with their rents, and if your residential properties are not giving you exactly what you want at that time, the commercial properties could be giving you something to feed on or something to hang on to. And then you could have semi-commercial properties as well, where maybe the top is a flat and the down is a shop. So you have both residential and commercial elements all in one property. Some people invest on that basis, because if the shops are not doing well, the residential property might be doing well. And that's a mixture of these properties with different uses could make up your portfolio, depending on what and why you are investing. I mean, you might not be very experienced in commercial property investment, so you might want to avoid it. You might say, okay, I'm not very experienced in commercial property investments. I can't own offices. I would rather own a semi-commercial property, and some semi-commercials and then some residentials, which gives me a bite into the commercial revenue stream and a bite into residential revenue stream as well. But there are people who own a conglomerate of all these, some semi-commercials, some commercials, and some residential. That is what diversification is all about, because it now spreads the risk across the different classes of properties that you own. The last but not the least, some properties are diversified alongside the lines of the age of those properties. Now here I'm talking about, new builds, semi-new builds, and old or existing properties. There are some property investors who really, really love new builds, right? They love investing in new builds because they feel that new builds, they're new, they're beautiful, they're shiny, they will be easy to rent, and you get a good rental income from them, and they believe that those new builds will not give them much of a headache in terms of maintenance and repairs and all that. So they feel that's what new builds offer them. There are some others who also detest new builds, who feel, new builds are too expensive, they are always overpriced, the quality of the building materials are not always top notch, they don't always last, I don't like the layouts, the rooms are kind of too small, the areas where they are built, some of them the facilities are not really there, it will take time for the regeneration of that area to kick in. They might consider a variety of things. There are people, so for people like that, they would prefer to invest in old or existing properties. But then some people might say, okay, I want to have the best of both worlds. I know the risks associated with new builds. I know the risk associated with old existing properties, because those ones are old. It might cost you more money in maintenance, in fixing the property before you even rent it out. You have to refurbish it and spend this money on that, and you have to factor that into the rent, and then you might not even get what you want from there, and before you know it, in 6 months down the line, they are calling you again to come and fix the roof or fix the drainages because something has happened. I don't have that time. But so every one of these properties have its own risks that it poses to investors. So your ability to identify those risks and then structure your diversification strategies along those lines to mitigate those risks or minimize them or completely eliminate them is what makes you a very, very smart property investor. So that's another line to another diversification strategy along the lines of age. Some people might then say, I want to have the best of both worlds. I want to have some older existing properties and I want to have some new builds. So there might be tenants who are looking for new builds, and when they see new builds, they jump onto it because they too do not want issues with maintenance and old properties. Or there are tenants who like older existing properties, and if I buy in this area that has an already existing strong rental market for old or existing properties, it will not take me time to rent it because the market is already there. Or in this area, new builds, they are the in thing. Maybe you might see an area where an industrial unit is springing up. I have seen that in around the Luton and Dunstable, Houghton Regis area, and you could see industrial units springing up. And then you could see, if you go towards Milton Keynes as well, you see industrial units springing up. And just not too far away from those industrial units, you see new builds springing up. And then some investors will say, okay, with these industrial units springing up, people and thousands of people will be working in these companies and in these industrial units. So I want to get in there early and buy the new builds around that area and be able to take advantage of those who want to live closer to where they want to be working. Because not long from now, facilities like bus lanes and train stations and all that will be connected to these areas, and that will be getting in newly. So that might be the idea, and they will go in, buy those new builds, and then wait. As those industrial areas are coming, are springing up, people are coming and they are working and they are buying houses and they are renting houses there, and then the person is making the sort of profits or the sort of income that they've always expected. So these are the diversification strategies that we want to discuss today. I hope this has been useful to you, and I hope you've picked up a few things here. And whatever it is that along whatever lines you wish to diversify your property portfolio, the important thing is that you understand the importance and the principle of diversification and try to spread your risk across your assets as wide as possible. That is what smart investors do. Thank you very much, and please join me again on Monday live on Facebook, where we do our Modesty's Money Masterclass. And next week Wednesday, I'll be coming back to you again with another episode of Modesty's Property